Listen, the facts are the facts, Melissa. Read the report. I mean, you know, they can't make up facts. And I've read the report. Every one of the factual assertions they make in the report is footnoted, endnoted, backed up by documentary evidence or testimonial evidence that they got from interviews. I mean, that just can't be manufactured.
Welcome back to Harbor. That was Governor Chris Christie on Friday taking on the press by doubling down on a report commissioned by his own administration, which proclaims his innocence, his honesty, his integrity. The report has been soundly criticized, however, in the press for lacking thoroughness and objectivity. And as reporters continue to comb through the thousands of pages of supporting material, they are uncovering documents which contradict some of the report's own conclusions and narratives. As the Bergen Record reports, quote, in the thousands of pages of footnotes and exhibits released Thursday, many documents appear to lend at least some credence to allegations against Christie that the report plainly can't be true. We'll get to some of those, by the way, here in a moment. But yesterday, the report's author, Randy Mastro, was defiant when ABC's George Stephanopoulos challenged him about the report's questionable use of evidence, including the outing of a personal relationship between Bridget Kelly and Bill Stepien. Here's Mastro.
We had no incentive to do anything other than to get to the truth. And I have to say this, for the skeptics out there are some who have a visceral reaction to this bridge controversy. It reminds me of the movie line. They can't handle the truth. We believe we got to the truth, George.
Yeah, we didn't quite explain why he brought up a personal matter. Anyway, Kendall Coffee is a former U.S. attorney and NBC legal analyst, and Heather Haddon is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much. Heather, our producers, I have to give credit around here, went around and really dug up some interesting quotes. And what you come across in the full report is some of this tough guy stuff, if you will. I don't know if bullying is the right word in politics, but it shows where Druniak and Stepien, these guys are all close to the governor, even his press secretaries or his campaign manager, talking how they're going to rough up people like the Mayor Zimmer if she doesn't play ball, or going. It just seems they're sending the word out there all the time that they're going to, or Wildstein, they're going to pour gasoline in his skull. I mean, through his eye sockets. I mean, this is Sopranos talk. And it's not exactly inconsistent with time for some traffic problems in Fort Lee.
Yeah, we went through all 4,000 pages of the exhibits, and there are some really interesting tidbits in there that you don't get just by reading the report itself. And one of the things that came out was what you were referring to is some campaign emails. So one interesting thing right in the beginning is they talk about a target list of Democrats that they were looking to woo and court for endorsements. And when we've reported on this before, the campaign was very careful to say that the Democrats endorsed them voluntarily. This would seem to indicate there was at least some effort to really get these endorsements. Yeah,
this is key. This is key, that there was, in fact, a backdrop to why people like Bridget Kelly and Wildstein would try to punish or push or whatever, manipulate the mayor of Fort Lee. Here it is. The Master Report rejects any notion that there was a culture of political retaliation. But documents buried deep within the report raise questions about those conclusions. In one, we learned that Christie's campaign did keep a list of approved targets. These were Democratic mayors they wanted to endorse the governor, including Fort Lee Mayor Mark Sokolich.
Right.
And then there's this July conversation where Christie's campaign manager, I mentioned this, Bill Stepien, writes to chief political strategist Mike DeHame, quote, we're approaching a point in time where we have the so what's it going to be conversation with Hoboken Mayor Dawn Zimmer and Jersey City Mayor Steve Phillip. Are you with us or against us? So, Heather, it just seems like now I don't know if you call this the smoking gun, but the argument there was no evidence that the governor was after the mayor or ready to push him hard is there now. We now have it.
Well, Randy Mastro, again, has said with this report that they're drawing no conclusions as to why Mark Sokolich, the mayor of Fort Lee, was targeted. But Democrats I've talked to today, they've certainly made note of that target list. And I think this is something that they're going to be pursuing and questioning, if and when they start calling in people to testify and to take testimony. How was this target list used? Why was it developed? And what role does it have in Fort Lee?
You know, Kendall, it took decades for those of us who've dug up a lot of this stuff in the archives to find out Richard Nixon's role in Watergate. There's never been any evidence he ordered that particular break-in. But he ordered so many other break-ins of the Brookings Institution. He ordered specifically different times of night, who he wanted to do it. He talked about, not who he would do it, the whole details. He talked about how he wanted somebody to break in the Republican National Headquarters to make it look like a Democratic job. The MO was there. The culture was there. And what I'm getting in reading these notes in the report put out by Mastro, of all people, is that kind of backdrop. We're going to get this mayor. We're going to push this guy, pour gasoline in his skull, take out his eye sockets. I mean, the language is soprano, tough guy. Worse than that, perhaps. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and the tough guy language that's disclosed in some of those exhibits is inconsistent with the theme that this governor didn't do anything to in any way suggest a culture of payback or reward. And probably the report didn't need to go that far. I mean, you think about it, Chris, that's really a difficult thing to prove across the board with so many cities and so many different moving pieces and parts in a state like New Jersey. If it had been a more focused report, I think there could be less controversy about it. For example, if they'd said, we've interviewed 70 people, we've looked at 250,000 documents, 5 we couldn't interview, they're obviously very important, but we haven't found any indication that Chris Christie was personally complicit in Bridgegate. That would have been something that I think could have been helpful for Christie in a lot of respects, something that could have been received credibly.
Very narrow.
It's
very
narrow,
defense.
But now they're trying to get into speculating about the motive for Bridget Kelly, and that's provoked a firestorm of controversy. They're trying to give sort of a broad bit of immunity for everything from anything about a culture of bullying to the controversy about Hoboken and Don Zimmer, who has said repeatedly that under oath she would back up what she said. I think it's pretty hard to be dismissive without a whole lot of fact-finding on something like that. And I think the report, by dismissing that allegation, maybe set itself up to look more like a Christie document than a truly objective independent counsel's document.
And by the way, that to me always hits me as the hardest of all these stories, Heather and Kendall. That is this talk about this sort of lieutenant governor coming in and saying, I wish it wasn't this way. It had real credibility. I wish it didn't have to be this way. I wish it wasn't this way. But the governor told me last night, if you don't back this project that he cares about on the waterfront in Hoboken, you ain't getting any money from the government. Anyway, let's look at another conversation that's buried in the supporting documents of the Master report that we just mentioned. In January, Christie spoke when, as I mentioned, Michael Druniak sends a colorful text message to a friend which reads, the only trouble is David Wildstein was a true friend of mine. Now I could claw his eyes out, pour gasoline in the sockets, and light him up. Well, if that ever went before a jury, I don't know. I mean, Heather, I just wonder, I don't think you can get that image out of your head of this kind of frightening vengeance to even think theatrically like I'm going to fill a guy's skull with burning gasoline.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Druniak his name was referenced in some of the subpoenas that came out earlier with the documents that Democrats released. There was also some colorful language there in terms of how he referred to reporters and talking about this issue within the administration. So again, I expect, Democrats are going to make note of that. I think also really coming back to the relationship issue with Bill Stepien and Bridget Kelly, which is referenced in the report.
Did he ever explain it? Did he ever justify that to anybody, whether it's George Stephanopoulos at ABC or anybody, why he would bring in what seemed to be not even tangential, just sort of sitting out there without really explaining why a relationship, if it occurred between those two people, would be relevant?
Well, Randy Mastro was asked about this on Friday during the press conference. He said it relates to the state of mind of Bridget Kelly at that time, that according to him, that relationship had broken up and therefore they weren't talking as much, her and Bill Stepien, and she was out of the loop in some sense. So maybe she was acting on her own. But again,
it wasn't to make her look loopy.
Well, Democrats I talked to today are really fixating on that, and they really think that stands out as a point that's gratuitous. And when you look at the document, there's no footnotes or notation there that is based on an interview, and that gets back to the points that they're making now is they want the 70 people who they interviewed released. They want those names. They also want the transcripts of the testimony and those interviews released. And I believe that they are going to potentially issue subpoenas for those because they say that there's a lot of unanswered questions from that document.
Heather, I got an argument for them. It's state property. That could be an argument, and therefore they should release it. Kendall, is that a good argument? All the background information dug up by Randy Mastro was done at the government's expense. Therefore, it seems like the legislature would have the entitlement to demand that it be publicized, released.
They're going to get every scrap of that paper, every document, every interview, and they're going to push for the notes because, of course, there's a lot of work product that goes into creating a report on that. They're going to insist on that. And I think the issues about the report's unfortunate reference to Bridget Kelly and her relationship is it centers on a big weakness in the report. What is the motivation here? If, in fact, nobody in a higher-up position knew anything about this, if, in fact, there was no sort of tacit culture of encouragement for tough stuff politically, then why on earth does Bridget Kelly and Wildstein cook up this scheme? It doesn't make sense, and that is the big weakness in the report. It doesn't have a plausible hypothesis of motive. And if you can't answer and even compellingly suggest the why, then it's just that much harder to be convinced that you know what happened.
It's so well said there. I think I never thought of that before, but having worked in politics, because it's something you think the boss would like to have done, even if he didn't want to know about it. That's, to me, a culture we all worked in for good, bad, or evil, but that's politics. You always do something that you think the boss would like, even if he didn't like it being done. He knew it had to be done. You do things in his interest or her interest. Anyway, thank you, Kendall Coffee, and in his direction, too, usually. Heather Haddon, thank you so much from the Wall Street Journal.